Okay, so this was like a two-part session, and the point was just to try and find common ground on defining APIs for machine translation systems. And I know a bit about APIs and actually not much about machine translation beyond kind of high-level cocktail party talk. But luckily there were an incredibly large number of people who knew a lot about MT systems at different sizes, and we didn't want to talk too much about like the real technical nitty-gritties of this as much as talk about the different types of features that needed to be supported, because the different types of MT systems out there are very, very different. Like the things like Chris Wendt from Microsoft was there, and so like the system he has and he's familiar with is very different from like a small MT system that's been specifically trained on like a particular corpus for a client by like Applied Language Solutions or something like that, just as a random example. And so the question is, we have all these different things of different sizes with different bumps and knobs on them, and can we find any common ground to make them look like similar things? And so that was the first session, was basically just to sort of start off talking about what these things look like. And when last we left our heroes, we discovered that we have like, this is the list of problems. And then the things we had agreed on that everybody had in common were, I think, a to and a from locale. So in part two, we decided to try and focus on some of the bigger problems that we'd found in part one, and focus on what we could do, what sort of agreement we could find about how to handle them in a way that was more generic. And the first problem we looked at was the idea of dictionaries, which are, you know, sort of, they're used for various purposes. In general, some sort of terminology mapping. That's a gross simplification. And basically what we decided about dictionaries is that actually you cannot expose them through an API explicitly, because the differences are too great. For example, just the differences between what data a dictionary contains in an SMT system versus a rule-based system is completely different. And so basically, the decision with dictionaries was the best approach was to hide it on the back end and have it identified through some opaque identifier like a profile ID, so that there would be some sort of external configuration process that would precede the use of this API, and that would probably vary by implementation. The next thing was to talk about tag awareness, which is a capability of some systems where if there's markup in the source text, it kind of is sticky and it moves with the text it was attached to in the translation. Rule-based systems in general, I think, are better at this than SMT systems, which can only kind of guess. Some systems don't support it at all, and in fact, if you pass the markup to them, they will give you pretty bad results. So the first thing that we needed in the API for this was actually a way to query the system and ask if it supported this at all, so that you could discover this, and if it didn't, you would know not to pass, to normalize your text so that you didn't unintentionally degrade the quality of the MT. And then as far as what markup can be passed back, there was a desire to try and simplify the tag parsing on the back end so that every MT provider didn't need to support every old type of markup. And the best solution that we talked about was actually what Occam's M for Loc project does, which is it supports just two tags from XLIF. One is the standalone placeholder tag, and one is the beginning and end paired tags. And basically the idea would be that the client would have to, could use this to essentially make opaque whatever markup they had that they wanted to send, and they could just send instead the subset, and then they would have to, there'd be a coding and a decoding process. We thought that would generally work pretty well and wouldn't be too hard to implement. And also that would let us solve the idea of text protection, which is the idea of, one of the use cases for a dictionary is you want a word to translate to itself, which is the same way of saying you don't want to translate this particular word, like iPod or something like that. And so you could in fact just use a standalone tag as a way to protect it the way you would with a human translator. Then we got into domains. Domains are sticky. Domains are a bunch of things. Domains, much of the debate is about what does domains mean. There is the notion of taxonomies, which may be standardized content categories, things like legal or medical or religion, which is the contentious one. And then there may be domains that are not part of general taxonomies, but may be tied to particular companies who have specialized TMs. They may refer to particular product lines or indicate something about the data on which the corpus was trained. And so there was kind of two, I'm not sure we came to a hard agreement on this. What basically evolved is that there's kind of two things we want to support. One is the idea that a domain is a statement about the content you're sending for translation, and this is a hint, essentially, to the MT system, and that is worth supporting using a common vocabulary to try and get, just as a hint mechanism, and that's kind of a standard taxonomy thing. But then there's also the need to support these custom domains that don't necessarily fit into that, but are tied to the customer or the use case or whatever. And so there should probably also be a mechanism for querying available domains that may be defined in addition to any known taxonomies. And then the ability to pass these things back as part of the API. That's as far as we got. And actually, that's farther than I thought we would get, so I was pretty happy. And the next step, I guess, would be to actually try and continue this discussion and talk about ways to actually implement it. And we didn't get to the logistics of that, but I'm sure it'll work out. I'm an optimist.